clutched her worn leather purse as she stood before the towering iron gates of the Blackwood estate. The Gothic mansion loomed against the gray October sky like something from a horror movie, complete with gargoyles perched on the corners and ivy creeping up the dark stone walls. Her beat-up Civic looked pathetically out of place, parked beside the pristine driveway that stretched endlessly toward the imposing front entrance. "You can do this," she whispered to herself, checking her reflection in the car's side mirror one last time. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she'd worn her best interview outfit, a navy blazer she'd bought at a thrift store and black slacks that had seen better days. At 28, had been through enough hardships to know that desperation often masqueraded as opportunity. The job posting had been too good to be true. Live-in nanny position for triplet boys, age 7, with a salary that would solve all her financial problems and provide a stable home for her own 5-year-old daughter, Sophia. The only catch mentioned was that the previous 17 nannies had quit within 2 days. Had laughed when she read that detail, thinking it was some kind of exaggeration. How difficult could 3 little boys possibly be? As she approached the massive oak door, it swung open before she could knock. A tall, elegant woman with silver hair and sharp blue eyes stood in the doorway, wearing an expression that suggested she'd been expecting disappointment. "You must be," the woman said, her British accent crisp and authoritative. "I am Mrs. the household manager. You're precisely on time, which is more than I can say for the last 3 candidates who didn't bother showing up at all." Followed Mrs. through a grand foyer that could have housed her entire apartment. Crystal chandeliers hung from a ceiling so high she had to crane her neck to see it properly. Oil paintings of stern-looking ancestors gazed down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to track her movement across the marble floor. "The master of the house, Mr. Blackwood, will be conducting the interview," Mrs. explained as they walked through corridors lined with antique furniture and Persian rugs. "He's very particular about who cares for his sons. The boys are unique children with specific needs." They paused outside a heavy wooden door marked with intricate carvings. Mrs. turned to face with an expression that bordered on pity. "Before we go in, I feel obligated to warn you about what you're getting into. The Blackwood triplets are not ordinary children. They're intelligent beyond their years, resourceful in ways that would impress military strategists, and they seem to take genuine pleasure in driving their caretakers to the brink of madness." Straightened her shoulders. "I've dealt with difficult children before, Mrs. My daughter went through her own challenging phases." "With respect, miss, unless your daughter has ever successfully orchestrated the psychological breakdown of a former Navy SEAL, glued a graduate to a chair using industrial adhesive, or convinced a professional child psychologist that she was losing her mind, then you haven't encountered anything quite like the Blackwood boys." Before could respond, Mrs. knocked and pushed open the door. The study beyond was a masculine sanctuary of dark wood paneling, floor to ceiling, and a fireplace large enough to roast a whole pig. Behind an enormous mahogany desk sat a man who made breath catch in her throat. Blackwood was devastatingly handsome in a way that seemed almost supernatural. His black hair was perfectly styled. His jawline could have been carved by Michelangelo, and his dark eyes held depths that seemed to pull her in like a gravitational force. He wore an expensive black suit that fit his tall, athletic frame like it had been crafted specifically for him. When he stood to greet her, noticed he moved with a fluid grace that reminded her of a predator. "Miss," he said, his voice a rich baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Please have a seat." Settled into the leather chair across from his desk, trying to ignore how his intense gaze seemed to see straight through her. "Thank you for considering me for this position, Mr. Blackwood." "I'll be honest with you," said, leaning back in his chair. "I'm running out of options. The employment agency has threatened to blacklist me if I go through any more nannies. The boys seem to view each new caretaker as a personal challenge to overcome." "What exactly do they do that drives people away so quickly?" His lips curved into what might have been a smile if it hadn't looked so pained. "Where would you like me to start? Last week's nanny, a woman with 20 years of experience, quit after finding all her belongings mysteriously relocated to the roof. The week before that, a man who specialized in troubled children lasted exactly 18 hours before fleeing in the middle of the night, claiming he'd never work with devil spawn again." Frowned. "That seems like more than typical childhood mischief." "The boys are extraordinarily clever," continued. "They work together like a military unit, planning their campaigns with precision that would impress generals. They've mastered the art of psychological warfare, and they seem to instinctively know exactly which buttons to push to break down an adult's defenses. Have you considered that they might be acting out because they need stability? If they've gone through 17 nannies, they're probably testing each new person to see if they'll stick around. Something flickered across features, surprise, perhaps, or approval. That's an interesting perspective. Most people assume they're simply malicious. Leaned forward slightly. Children aren't born malicious, Mr. Blackwood. They learn behaviors that get them the attention or control they need. If your sons are as intelligent as you say, they've probably figured out that driving away caretakers is an effective way to maintain some power in their lives. Studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes unreadable. Tell me about your experience with children. I've been working with kids for 8 years, replied. I started as a teacher's aide while finishing my education degree, then worked as a substitute teacher before becoming a full-time nanny. I've cared for children with autism, ADHD, anxiety disorders, and behavioral challenges. I also have a 5-year-old daughter of my own, Sophia, who would be living here with me if you decide to hire me. The position requires living on the estate, confirmed. The boys need constant supervision, especially during nighttime hours. They're active sleepers and have been known to wander. Nodded, that's not a problem. Sophia is well-behaved and wouldn't interfere with my duties. What makes you think you can succeed where 17 other qualified individuals have failed? Took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Because I'm not going anywhere, Mr. Blackwood. I need this job, and more importantly, I think your sons need someone who won't give up on them at the first sign of trouble. I'm not easily intimidated, I don't take things personally, and I have more patience than most people consider healthy. Was quiet for several minutes, his fingers steepled as he considered her words. Finally, he spoke. The salary is $50,000 per year, plus room and board for both you and your daughter. You'll have weekends off once the boys are comfortable with you, and full health benefits. Tried not to let her relief show on her face. That salary was more than she'd made in the past 2 years combined. That's very generous. There are some unusual aspects to this position that I need to make clear, continued. The boys have specific dietary requirements and sleep schedules that must be strictly maintained. They're homeschooled and follow a very particular curriculum. They also have certain sensitivities that require the house to be kept darker than most people prefer during daytime hours. That's not a problem, assured him. What about their mother? Will I be coordinating with her about their care? His expression darkened, and for a moment thought she saw something almost dangerous flash across his features. Their mother is not in the picture. It's just the boys and myself. Before could ask any follow-up questions, the study door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall. 3 identical boys charged into the room like a miniature army, and immediately understood why 17 nannies had fled in terror. The Blackwood triplets were beautiful children, but there was something unsettling about their perfection. They had their father's dark hair and striking features, but their eyes held an intelligence that seemed far too mature for 7-year-olds. They moved with coordinated precision, spreading out to surround chair like wolves circling prey. Father, the first boy said, his voice polite but somehow menacing. Mrs. said you were interviewing another nanny. We wanted to meet her, added the second boy, his head tilted as he studied like she was a puzzle to be solved. To see if she's stronger than the others, finished the third boy, a smile playing at his lips that didn't reach his cold eyes. Looked from one boy to the next, nodding their identical faces but distinctly different energies. The first boy, who had spoken with authority, was clearly the leader. The second seemed to be the observer, taking in every detail about her appearance and demeanor. The third had a mischievous quality that immediately put her on guard. You must be, and Noah said calmly, not bothering to stand up or show any sign of intimidation. I'm. The boys exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes without words. The leader stepped closer to her chair. Our last nanny cried when she met us. Why aren't you crying? Should I be? Asked, meeting his gaze steadily. You're just 3 little boys, not monsters. Tilted his head further, like a bird studying an interesting insect. She doesn't smell like fear, he announced to his brothers. Not yet, Noah added with that unsettling smile. Turned to address, who was watching the interaction with keen interest. When would you like me to start, Mr. Blackwood? You still want the job? He asked, seeming genuinely surprised. I do. The triplets began whispering among themselves in voices too low for to hear, but their body language suggested they were formulating some kind of plan. Noticed their huddle and cleared his throat sharply. Boys, return to your lessons. Miss and I are not finished discussing the position. We'll see you soon, miss, said with a slight bow that somehow managed to seem both respectful and threatening. Very soon, echoed, his observant eyes never leaving her face. We can't wait to play with you, Noah added, his grin widening to show perfect white teeth. The three boys filed out of the room with the same coordinated precision they'd used to enter, leaving alone with their father once again. Well, said after a moment, that went better than expected. Usually candidates are in tears by now. Smoothed her skirt and adjusted her blazer. They're testing me to see if I'll run away like the others. It's actually quite clever for children their age. When can you start? Asked. I have business that requires me to travel frequently, and I need someone I can trust to maintain order in my absence. I can start tomorrow if you'd like, replied. I'll need to pack our belongings and arrange to have them transported here. Mrs. will handle the moving arrangements. She'll also give you a tour of the house and explain the boys' routines. Stood and extended his hand to seal their agreement. When shook it, she was struck by how cold his skin felt, like marble in winter. As Mrs. led her back through the mansion's corridors, caught glimpses of the boys watching from various doorways and staircases. They didn't try to hide their surveillance, and she had the distinct impression they were studying her for weaknesses. The boys' rooms are on the 3rd floor, Mrs. explained as they climbed a grand staircase. Your suite will be on the same floor, close enough to hear them if they need anything during the night. Master's chambers are on the 4th floor, and he's made it quite clear that area is strictly off-limits. They passed by an enormous library where caught sight of advanced textbooks and scientific equipment that seemed far too sophisticated for elementary-age children. What exactly are the boys studying? She asked. They're extremely gifted, Mrs. replied diplomatically. They work several grade levels above their age in most subjects. Master has very specific ideas about their education. Assigned rooms were luxurious beyond anything she'd ever experienced. The bedroom was larger than her entire previous apartment, with a 4-poster bed, antique furniture, and tall windows draped in heavy velvet. The adjoining room would be perfect for Sophia, with built-in and a window seat overlooking the estate's gardens. Dinner is served at precisely 6 o'clock, Mrs. continued. The boys eat separately from Master due to their dietary restrictions. You'll take your meals with them to ensure they eat properly. They can be quite particular about their food. As if summoned by the mention of food, the triplets appeared in the hallway outside's door. They moved so quietly that she hadn't heard them approach, and their sudden presence made her jump slightly. Miss, said with that same polite formality, would you like us to show you around the estate? There are many interesting places here. Nodded enthusiastically. Secret passages and hidden rooms, very old things. Things that most people find disturbing, Noah added, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Recognized the invitation for what it was, another test. They were hopping to frighten her with whatever dark family secrets the old mansion contained. I'd love a tour, she said with a bright smile. I find old houses fascinating. The boys led her through room after room of Gothic splendor, pointing out family portraits, antique weapons collections, and a medieval-style dungeon in the basement that sincerely hoped was just for show. Throughout the tour, they peppered her with questions designed to unnerve her. Do you believe in monsters, miss? Asked as they stood before a particularly grotesque gargoyle statue. Do you think some people deserve to be punished for their sins? Inquired while showing her a room full of ancient torture devices. Are you afraid of the dark? Noah wondered as they explored a windowless chamber lit only by flickering candles. Answered each question thoughtfully and honestly, refusing to show fear or moral judgment. By the time they returned to the main floor, she sensed a subtle shift in the boys' attitudes toward her. They were still testing, but with less hostile intent. As evening approached, prepared to return home to pack and say goodbye to Sophia's babysitter. The triplets gathered to see her off, standing in perfect formation by the front door. We'll be ready for you tomorrow, miss, announced. We have special plans, added, his head tilting in that bird-like way. You won't last 2 days, Noah predicted with cheerful certainty. crouched down to their eye level, meeting each boy's gaze in turn. "I'm not going anywhere, boys. You can test me all you want, but I'm going to be here whether you like it or not. You might as well get used to me." For the first time since she'd met them, all three boys seemed genuinely surprised. They exchanged those silent glances again, but this time sensed uncertainty rather than malicious planning. As she drove away from the Blackwood estate, couldn't shake the feeling that she was walking into something far more complex than a simple nanny position. There were too many strange details, almost supernatural attractiveness, the boys' unsettling intelligence, the emphasis on darkness and unusual dietary requirements, the way everyone in the household moved with predatory grace. But had nowhere else to go. Her savings were depleted, her rent was overdue, and Sophia needed stability more than anything else in the world. Whatever secrets the Blackwood family harbored, she would deal with them. She'd survived an abusive marriage, poverty, and single motherhood. Three precocious boys couldn't possibly be worse than what she'd already overcome. As darkness fell over the estate behind her, had no idea that she was about to become part of a world where fairy tales were real, monsters walked among humans, and her new employer was something far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The Blackwood triplets weren't just difficult children. They were vampire princes, and their father was the most powerful vampire king in existence. But was about to prove that sometimes, the most ordinary humans possess extraordinary strength, and that a mother's determination could be more powerful than any supernatural force. Arrived at the Blackwood estate the next morning with Sophia in tow, their few possessions packed into mismatched suitcases and cardboard boxes. Sophia pressed her face against the car window as they approached the mansion, her brown eyes wide with wonder. "Is that a castle?" Sophia whispered in Spanish, reverting to her native language as she often did when excited or nervous. "Sort of," replied, parking near the servants' entrance as Mrs. had instructed. "We're going to live here while I work for a very important family." Sophia nodded solemnly. At 5 years old, she was accustomed to sudden changes and new living situations. Her resilience broke heart and filled her with determination in equal measure. Mrs. met them at the door, her expression softening slightly when she saw Sophia. "You must be Miss Sophia. I'm Mrs. We have a special breakfast prepared for you while your mother gets settled in." Watched nervously as Mrs. led Sophia to the kitchen, but her daughter went willingly, chattering about the castle and asking polite questions about the house. Followed them, marveling again at the mansion's opulent interior. The kitchen was enormous, with professional-grade appliances and a long wooden table that could seat a dozen people. Sophia was given fresh fruit, toast, and orange juice while received coffee and a plate of scrambled eggs. As they ate, Mrs. outlines daily responsibilities. "The boys rise at noon," she began, consulting a leather-bound notebook. "They're not morning children by nature. They have breakfast at 12:30, lessons from 1 to 4, outdoor time from 4 to 6 if weather permits, dinner at 6:30, free time until 9, and bedtime at 10. Frowned, "That's quite a late schedule for 7-year-olds. "Master prefers it this way," Mrs. replied firmly. "The boys are very sensitive to sunlight, so they're most active during evening hours." As if summoned by the mention of their name, the triplets appeared in the kitchen doorway. They'd clearly just woken up, their dark hair tousled and their clothes rumpled, but even disheveled, they moved with that same eerie coordination. Their eyes immediately fixed on Sophia, who looked up from her toast with curious interest. "You brought a small human," observed, tilting his head as he studied Sophia. "She smells different than you," added, his nostrils flaring slightly. "Younger blood." "Can we keep her?" Noah asked with his unsettling grin. Stood up quickly, positioning herself between the boys and her daughter. "Sophia, these are the boys I told you about. Boys, this is my daughter, Sophia. She's going to be living here with us." Sophia slid down from her chair and walked over to the triplets with the fearless confidence that only small children possessed. She looked up at them with frank curiosity, apparently unbothered by their intimidating presence. "You all look exactly the same," she said in her accented English. "Are you twins?" Triplets corrected, "I'm this is and that's Noah." "I'm Sophia Morales," she replied with formal precision, the way had taught her to introduce herself. "I'm 5 years old. How old are you?" "7," answered, though his calculating gaze suggested someone much older studying Sophia like a specimen. "Do you want to be our friend?" Noah asked, and for the first time his smile seemed genuinely childlike rather than menacing. Sophia considered this seriously. "Maybe, are you nice?" The question seemed to catch all three boys off guard. They exchanged their silent glances and sensed some kind of internal debate taking place. "We can be nice," said finally, though he sounded uncertain about the concept. "When we want to be," added. "We're not nice to most people," Noah admitted with brutal honesty. Sophia nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Says some people aren't nice because no one teaches them how. Do you know how to play games?" "We know lots of games," Noah said, his eyes lighting up with mischievous delight. Cleared her throat. "Maybe you boys should eat breakfast before you start playing. Mrs., what would you like me to do while they're having their meal?" "Actually," Mrs. said, consulting her notebook again, "Master requested that you observe their breakfast routine. The boys have very specific dietary needs that must be carefully monitored." Followed the group to a smaller dining room where place settings had been prepared with fine china and crystal glasses. What struck her as odd was that each place setting included a large goblet alongside the usual water glass, and the goblets contained a dark red liquid that definitely wasn't juice. "Is that wine?" asked, alarmed. "You can't give alcohol to children." Mrs. looked uncomfortable. "It's a special dietary supplement prescribed by their physician. The boys have a rare blood disorder that requires them to consume iron-rich liquids with every meal." Watched as the triplets sat down and immediately reached for their goblets, drinking the red liquid with obvious pleasure. Their behavior around the mysterious drink was different from how they approached their solid food, more reverent, almost ritualistic. "What kind of blood disorder?" pressed. "I should know about any medical conditions that might affect their care." "It's very rare," Mrs. said evasively. "Master can explain the details better than I can." Throughout breakfast, noticed other peculiarities. The boys ate very little solid food, picking at their eggs and toast while draining their goblets completely. They seemed more energized after drinking the red liquid, their pale skin gaining a subtle flush of color. Most unsettling of all, when Noah accidentally cut his finger on a knife, the wound healed completely within minutes, leaving no trace of injury. Sophia, meanwhile, had claimed a seat next to and was chattering away about her favorite cartoons and toys. Listened with intense focus, as if memorizing every detail about her. Occasionally, he would ask probing questions that seemed designed to learn about Sophia's fears, preferences, and weaknesses. "Do you like scary movies?" he asked during a lull in her monologue. "No," Sophia replied firmly. "They give me bad dreams." "What about the dark? Are you afraid when it's dark?" Sophia shrugged. "Only sometimes, leaves a light on for me." Watched this interrogation with growing unease. The boy was clearly gathering intelligence about her daughter, just as they'd tried to identify vulnerabilities during their first meeting. After breakfast, Mrs. led and Sophia to their rooms to unpack. The boys followed like shadows, observing every item that came out of the suitcases with keen interest. They seemed particularly fascinated by Sophia's stuffed animals and picture books. "You have many soft creatures," noted, picking up a worn teddy bear. "That's Mr. Buttons," Sophia explained. "He protects me when I sleep." Noah laughed, a sound that raised goosebumps on his arms. "A little bear can't protect you from anything." "He can too," Sophia insisted with the absolute certainty of childhood. "He's very brave." Finished unpacking quickly, eager to establish some boundaries before the boys' curiosity became too invasive. "Sophia, why don't you explore our new rooms while I start learning about the boys' lessons?" For the next several hours, observed the triplets' homeschool routine. Their curriculum was unlike anything she'd ever seen: advanced mathematics, multiple languages, history focused on medieval periods, and science experiments that seemed more appropriate for high school students. They absorbed information at an incredible rate and demonstrated problem-solving skills that bordered on supernatural. Their tutor, a nervous man named Professor, clearly feared his students. He stumbled over words whenever they asked questions, and his hands shook as he demonstrated chemistry experiments. Quickly realized that the boys enjoyed his discomfort and deliberately asked challenging questions to watch him squirm. "Professor," said during a biology lesson about human anatomy, "what would happen if someone lost too much blood? How long would it take them to die?" "Well, that is," It depends on several factors, stammered, mopping sweat from his forehead. What if they lost it slowly, pressed, drop by drop over many hours? Would they scream? Noah added with scientific curiosity that didn't match his age. Stepped forward. Boys, those are very advanced questions. Why don't we focus on the lesson Professor has prepared for today? The triplets turned their attention to her, and she saw a flicker of surprise in their eyes. Previous nannies had probably cowered in the corner during lessons, but wasn't intimidated by their morbid curiosity. We like learning about death, said matter-of-factly. Father says knowledge is power. And death is the ultimate power, added, his young voice carrying disturbing conviction. Everyone dies eventually, Noah finished, except us. His blood ran cold at that last comment, but she maintained her calm exterior. Everyone has different interests, but during lesson time, we follow the curriculum Professor has prepared. The rest of the afternoon proceeded more smoothly, though noticed the boys testing her boundaries in subtle ways. They would push against rules to see if she would enforce them, make inappropriate comments to gauge her reactions, and constantly observe her interactions with Sophia. As evening approached, returned from his business trip, heard his car in the driveway and watched from a third-floor window as he emerged from a sleek black. Even from a distance, his presence seemed to command attention. He moved with that same predatory grace she'd noticed before, and something about his silhouette reminded her of the gargoyle statues throughout the house. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, though ate separately in his study. Supervised the boys' meal while Sophia sat beside her, still asking endless questions about their new home. The red liquid was served again, and made a mental note to research rare blood disorders when she had access to the internet. After dinner, helped Sophia get ready for bed while the boys had their free time. She could hear them moving around the house, their footsteps eerily synchronized as they traveled from room to room. Occasionally, she heard whispered conversations in a language she didn't recognize, though it sounded ancient and somehow ritualistic. Sophia fell asleep easily in her new bed, exhausted by the day's excitement. Sat beside her for a while, stroking her dark hair and wondering what she'd gotten them into. The Blackwood family was clearly wealthy and eccentric, but there were too many strange details that didn't add up to simple eccentricity. Around 10 o'clock, went to check on the boys' bedtime routine. She expected to find them in their pajamas, perhaps reading or playing quiet games before sleep. Instead, she discovered their rooms empty, beds unslept in, and windows standing wide open to the cool October night. Panic seized her heart as she realized the boys were missing. She ran through the house, calling their names and checking every room she could find. Mrs. was nowhere to be seen, and when knocked on study door, there was no answer. Finally, she heard Sophia screaming. Raced back to their rooms, her heart pounding with terror. She found Sophia sitting up in bed, pointing at the window with shaking hands. Outside, 3 small figures clung to the brick wall like spiders, their faces pressed against the glass as they peered into the room. The boys were climbing on the outside of the mansion 3 stories above the ground, moving with impossible agility and showing no fear of the deadly drop below them. Their eyes reflected the moonlight like an animal's, and when they smiled at Sophia through the window, could swear she saw fangs. Sophia cried, launching herself into his arms. The boys are flying. Pulled Sophia away from the window and drew the heavy curtains closed. Her hands were shaking as she tried to process what she'd just seen. Children couldn't climb vertical walls. They couldn't survive a fall from that height, and they definitely shouldn't have eyes that glowed in the dark. A soft tapping came at the window, followed by muffled voices. "Let us in, miss," called through the glass. "We want to play with Sophia." "We won't hurt her," added, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Much. We just want to show her how to fly," Noah giggled. "It's fun once you get used to the falling." Grabbed Sophia and moved to the far side of the room. "Boys, get down from there right now. You could be seriously hurt." "We can't be hurt," replied matter-of-factly. "We're not like other children." "We're special," confirmed. "We're hungry," Noah added, and heard him licking his lips against the window glass. The tapping continued for several minutes before finally stopping. Waited another 10 minutes before cautiously approaching the window and peering through a gap in the curtains. The boys were gone, leaving no trace of their impossible climb. Sophia had fallen back asleep in his arms. apparently accepting the evening's events as just another strange aspect of their new home, but lay awake for hours, her mind racing with impossible explanations for what she'd witnessed. Around dawn, she finally heard the boys returning to their rooms. They moved through the hallway with whispered conversations and soft laughter, apparently pleased with their nighttime adventure. Made a mental note to speak with about proper security measures and bedtime supervision. But deep down, she knew that locks and supervision wouldn't contain the Blackwood triplets. They were something beyond ordinary children, something that natural laws and conventional parenting strategies. The question was whether had the strength to stay and protect Sophia from whatever darkness surrounded this family, or if she should join the 17 other nannies who had fled in terror. As morning light filtered through the heavy curtains made her decision. She wouldn't run. Sophia needed the stability this job provided, and despite their supernatural abilities, the boys were still children who needed guidance and care. She would find a way to manage them, no matter what they really were. But first, she needed to learn the truth about the Blackwood family's secrets, and she had a feeling that truth would be more terrifying than anything she could imagine. Spent the following days carefully observing the Blackwood family's routines while maintaining a facade of normalcy. The boys continued testing her with increasingly elaborate schemes, but she refused to be intimidated. When they filled her bathroom with live bats, she calmly shooed them out the window and cleaned up the mess. When they replaced all her clothes with medieval costumes, she wore them without complaint until Mrs. provided replacements. When they tried to convince Sophia that the mansion was haunted by showing her floating objects, quietly figured out their pulley system and dismantled it. What troubled most wasn't their pranks, but their growing fascination with Sophia. The boys followed her daughter everywhere, studying her reactions and testing her boundaries. They seemed particularly interested in her fear responses and would often orchestrate situations designed to frighten her. "They're just playing," told herself repeatedly, but their games felt more like predatory behavior than childhood mischief. The way they watched Sophia reminded of cats studying a wounded bird. On her 5th morning at the estate, finally cornered in his study. He was reading ancient-looking books by lamplight despite the bright sunshine outside, and she noticed he kept the heavy curtains drawn tight against the natural light. "Mr. Blackwood, I need to discuss your son's nighttime activities," began, settling into the chair across from his desk. "They've been leaving their rooms after bedtime and engaging in dangerous behavior." Looked up from his book, his dark eyes unreadable. "What kind of dangerous behavior?" "Last night I found them climbing on the exterior walls of the mansion. They were 3 stories up, moving around outside the windows like it was perfectly normal." Kept her voice steady, though her heart raced as she remembered the impossible sight. "And this concerns you because?" asked, his tone carefully neutral. Stared at him in disbelief. "Because children can fall and die, Mr. Blackwood. Because what I saw was physically impossible for normal 7-year-olds. Because there's something very wrong happening in this house, and I deserve to know what it is if I'm going to protect my daughter." Closed his book slowly, his movements deliberate and predatory. "What do you think is happening, miss?" Had spent days trying to rationalize what she'd witnessed, but every logical explanation crumbled under scrutiny. "I think your family isn't entirely human," she said quietly. "The boys' strength, their speed, their ability to heal from injuries, their unusual diet, their sensitivity to sunlight, it all points to something supernatural." "And if that were true," said, leaning back in his chair, "would you run away like the others?" Thought of Sophia, sleeping peacefully in their beautiful room. She thought of their empty bank account and the overdue rent on their old apartment. She thought of the 17 previous nannies who had fled in terror, and the boys' desperate need for someone who wouldn't abandon them. "No," she said firmly. "I wouldn't run, but I would need to understand exactly what I'm dealing with so I can keep my daughter safe." Studied her for a long moment, his expression shifting from suspicion to something that might have been respect. "Very well, but once I tell you the truth, there will be no going back. You'll be part of our world with all the dangers that entails." Straightened her shoulders. "I understand." Stood and walked to the window, though he didn't pull back the curtains. "My family are vampires, miss. Not the romanticized creatures from your movies and books, but apex predators who have ruled over humans for. I am over 800 years old, and I am what your legends call a vampire king, one of the most powerful of our kind." His first instinct was to laugh, but the absolute sincerity in his voice stopped her. You're serious. Completely serious. My sons are vampire princes born to eventually inherit territories and command their own covens. They possess strength, speed, and abilities that far exceed human limitations. They also have predatory instincts that are difficult to control at their age. His mind raced, connecting dots she tried to ignore. The red liquid they drink with meals. Blood, confirmed. Animal blood mostly, though they crave human blood as they mature. Their dietary needs are quite specific. And their behavior towards Sophia's expression darkened. They view her as potential prey. They're testing her responses, learning her weaknesses, deciding whether she would make an interesting meal or a useful pet. Horror washed over, but she forced herself to remain calm. Are you going to let them hurt her? Not if I can help it, replied. But my sons are young vampires and their instincts are strong. They've never had extended contact with a human child before. Your daughter's presence is educational for them. Stood up abruptly, her protective instincts flaring. Educational. She's not a teaching tool for your monster children. In an instant was across the room, his hand wrapped around's throat with supernatural speed. His eyes had turned completely black, and when he spoke, she could see razor-sharp fangs. Never call my sons monsters, he growled, his voice carrying otherworldly power that made her bones vibrate. They are princes of the night, heirs to power beyond your comprehension. Show them the respect they deserve. Couldn't breathe, but she refused to show fear. She met Sin human gaze steadily, even as darkness crept around the edges of her vision. They're still children, she whispered. No matter what they are, they need guidance and boundaries. Held her for another moment before releasing her and stepping back. His eyes returned to their normal dark brown, and his fangs retracted. You continue to surprise me, miss. Most humans would be begging for their lives by now. Rubbed her throat, feeling the bruises that were already forming. I'm not most humans, Mr. Blackwood, and if you want me to help your sons learn control, you need to trust me to do my job. Which is teaching them that Sophia isn't prey. She's a little girl who could be their friend if they treat her with kindness instead of viewing her as a hunting exercise. Returned to his chair, his movements once again fluid and graceful. Vampires don't have friends, miss. We have allies, servants, and prey. Teaching my sons to form emotional attachments to humans would be doing them a disservice. Maybe that's why they drove away 17 nannies, suggested. Maybe they're not acting out because they're monsters, but because they're lonely children who don't know how to connect with others. They connect with each other perfectly well. Because they're identical, they understand each other instinctively. But they need to learn how to relate to different kinds of people if they're going to rule territories and command covens like you said. Considered this, his fingers steepled as he thought. You propose to teach vampire princes social skills. I propose to teach 3 little boys how to be kind, corrected. Whatever supernatural abilities they possess, they're still children who need to learn right from wrong. Vampires don't follow human concepts of morality. Then maybe it's time they learn some new concepts, said boldly. Unless you want them to spend eternity driving away everyone who tries to care for them. That evening, implemented her plan. Instead of supervising the boys from a distance during their free time, she organized structured activities that included Sophia. She taught them human games like hide-and-seek and tag, though she had to modify the rules to account for their supernatural abilities. The point isn't to win, explained when complained that using vampire speed made the games too easy. The point is to have fun together and learn to play fair. Why would we want to play fair? Asked, genuinely confused. We're stronger and faster, we should use our advantages. Because Sophia can't keep up with your vampire abilities, replied patiently. If you always use your powers, she can't participate, and then you're playing alone instead of together. Noah tilted his head, considering this. But we like being alone, other creatures are boring. Sophia isn't boring, pointed out. She's taught you new games, told you stories about her old home, and shared her toys with you. She's made your evenings more interesting, hasn't she? The boys exchanged their silent glances and sensed internal debate. They were beginning to recognize that Sophia brought something valuable to their isolated existence, but their predatory instincts fought against viewing her as anything other than prey. Over the following weeks, worked tirelessly to reshape the boys' interactions with Sophia. She introduced concepts like empathy, friendship, and protection of the innocent. When they scared Sophia, made them comfort her and apologize. When they showed kindness, she praised them extensively. The breakthrough came on a rainy Thursday evening when Sophia fell down the main staircase while chasing a ball. Heard the crash and her daughter's terrified screams from 3 floors away. By the time she reached the scene, she found all 3 boys surrounding Sophia, their young faces twisted with concern. Was examining Sophia's scraped knee with gentle precision, while Noah held her hand and whispered soothing words. Stood guard, his posture protective as he watched for any additional threats. When appeared, they looked up with expressions that were purely childlike for the first time since she'd met them. "We didn't hurt her," said quickly. "She fell by herself." "We tried to catch her, but we were too far away," added, his usual analytical tone replaced by genuine distress. "Is she going to be okay?" Noah asked and heard real worry in his voice. Knelt beside Sophia, checking for serious injuries while the boys hovered anxiously. "She's fine," she assured them. "Just some scrapes and bruises. You boys did exactly the right thing by staying with her and keeping her calm." The relief on their faces was unmistakable. They had been afraid they would be blamed for Sophia's accident, but more than that, they had been genuinely worried about her. It was the first time had seen them display protective instincts toward a human. "Can we help make her feel better?" asked. Smiled, "Yes, you can. You can be gentle with her while she's hurt, and maybe you can play quiet games that don't involve running or jumping." The boys threw themselves into caring for Sophia with the same intensity they'd once applied to their pranks. They brought her books, invented new quiet games, and even shared some of their favorite possessions to cheer her up. Sophia basked in their attention, delighted to have 3 devoted playmates. Observed these changes with apparent fascination. He began joining their evening activities occasionally, watching his sons interact with Sophia, and his presence was always somewhat unsettling, but noticed he seemed more relaxed around his children when they were engaged in peaceful activities. One evening, as was putting Sophia to bed, she found waiting in the hallway outside their rooms. "You've achieved something remarkable," he said quietly. "My sons have never shown protective instincts toward humans before." "They're good children," replied. "They just needed someone to teach them how to express their better nature." "Vampire nature doesn't include protecting the weak," pointed out. "You're changing fundamental aspects of what they are." Considered this carefully. Maybe I'm not changing what they are, maybe I'm helping them become who they could be. Was quiet for a long moment. Their vampire abilities will only grow stronger as they age. They will intensify. Their predatory instincts will become harder to control. What you've taught them may not survive their transition to full maturity. "Then I'll be here to remind them," said firmly. "As long as you'll have me, I'll help them navigate whatever challenges they face. And if they eventually hurt someone, if their vampire nature overrides your human teachings." Thought of the 3 boys who had comforted her injured daughter, who had learned to play fair and show kindness. "Everyone makes mistakes, Mr. Blackwood. Everyone struggles with darker impulses. The difference is whether they have people who love them enough to help them find their way back to the light." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You speak of love." "Of course I do. I love those boys, vampire princes or not. They're brilliant, complex, wonderful children who deserve to be cherished, not feared." "And Sophia, do you love her enough to risk exposing her to our world?" Looked through the doorway at her daughter, sleeping peacefully while 3 little vampires played quietly in the hallway, respecting her need for rest. "Sophia is safer here than she's ever been anywhere else. Your sons have become her protectors, and she's become their teacher in humanity. We're not just your employees anymore, Mr. Blackwood. We're family." For the first time since had met him, Blackwood smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that transformed his austere features. "Yes," he said softly, "I believe you are." As months passed, the Blackwood estate settled into a routine that none of the previous 17 nannies could have imagined. Successfully balanced the boys' vampire nature with human values, teaching them to control their supernatural abilities while developing their emotional intelligence. Sophia grew up thinking that having 3 vampire brothers was perfectly normal, and they adored her with the fierce devotion of natural protectors. Began trusting with greater responsibilities, sharing more about vampire society and the challenges his sons would face as they matured. He also began to see her not just as an employee, but as a partner in raising his children and perhaps something more. The estate that had once driven away caretakers with its dark secrets became a home filled with laughter, learning, and the kind of love that transcends the boundaries between species. Had proven that sometimes, the most powerful magic is simply refusing to give up on the people who need you most. And in teaching three little vampires how to be kind, she had discovered that monsters aren't born, they're made by the absence of love, understanding, and hope. With those essential elements restored, even the darkest creatures could choose to walk in the light.